Okay. And that's also why I don't force anybody to have their cameras on or whatever else, because the recording will also record that, just to give everybody a heads up. Um, okay, so let's talk about the syllabus. I'm going to pull it up here, then I'm going to share my screen with you. Okay, can everybody see the syllabus? Pretty much? Okay. So as I said, I am Dr. Smith. We will be meeting here every week on Thursdays at 9:30. This is film theory. Hopefully that's what you're here for. Um, Basically, the way this course will work is that I plan on having most things uploaded asynchronously, so you can kind of work on them at your own pace and on your own schedule. These synchronous sessions are for us to discuss the theory and the films that we're watching. They are very useful to attend. So even though I'm not taking attendance or grading attendance, just because, you know, the world we live in is kind of a mess right this second. And everybody has their own stuff going on, and we're all in this weird situation together. I just want to, you know, allow anybody who feels like they need to take a week off or something like that to feel free to do so. That said, like, please do show up and try to contribute if you can, either in the chat function or on Zoom. There are a few days when we'll just meet in chat rooms, so we won't even have to do this part of things. And you'll see why when we go through the syllabus, why this will be very helpful for you. All right, so what are we doing? Oh, I guess I should also mention the blended model. I've posted about this and it's on the syllabus right here. We will be split into groups to meet in person on campus. That is what we have been told has to happen. That said, I'm not a personally huge fan of that. And I'm sure that some of you are also not huge fans of that, especially given the fact that the state can't seem to get its mess together. So we'll see how that goes later in the semester. We don't have our first meeting until quite a few weeks in. And by that time, who knows what's going on? We might be fully online at that point, like UNC and Notre Dame and everybody else seems to be going. So everybody just work with us. You know, I would love to see everybody in person. And if we do, and when we do, it will be in College of Education 182, okay? But we'll talk about that as the time comes. We'll know more about it later. All right, so what are we doing in this class? So this class is an overview of a lot of different stuff. Basically, we're going to dive in each week, roughly, into a different mode of film theory and critical analysis. This is people describing ways to understand movies and cinema in a number of different ways. Okay, so some people take contextual approaches, so thinking about how we think about genre or culture as a component of how we understand film. Some people take psychoanalytic approaches, so how do we understand character psychology, things like that as we read through the film. Some people want to understand how audiences receive films, so reception theory, cognitive theory, things like that. And what we're going to do in this class is kind of get a broad overview of a lot of these different people talking about these same things, some building on one another, some arguing against one another, and saying this is how we need to understand and read films. So if you have taken already, hopefully you have, your intro class where you learn how to do film analysis, this is more than just close film analysis. It's also just how can we take all of these approaches and apply them specifically in different ways to different movies, okay? So that being said, this is the big caveat I have for y'all, and I know that it's gonna suck because we're mostly online. There is a lot of reading, okay? If you've looked at the syllabus, you already know this. We'll go through everything here shortly. but just be prepared that you will feel like you are overwhelmed by the reading. It is dense, it is complicated. Some of the people are writing in styles that you're not necessarily familiar with. People are not just writing the same types of essays. It's not really an argumentative essay like you've learned in high school or even some of your other English classes. And that's okay. You will feel overwhelmed, and that's fine. When I was an undergraduate, I felt overwhelmed. Sometimes now, as somebody who spent a decade in school, I still feel overwhelmed reading some of this stuff. So do not be scared of it. You can understand it. Just know that it takes a little bit of work on your end just to kind of work through exactly what in the hell these people are talking about sometimes, okay? Talk more about that in a minute. We do have screenings. You're basically one film a week. There are a couple of weeks where the film overlaps, but you need to do those viewings along with your theory reading before you come to Zoom session, okay, or our chat sessions, whichever one we're doing. The films I've chosen either demonstrate directly themselves aspects of the theory in question, or they provide historical grounding for that theory, or they raise further theoretical questions based in that theory that we can then explore, okay? Most of them, you just have to click on the link that I provide you, sign in through the library's website, and watch them, okay? You can do it on your phone. I don't care. I'm not really a media specificity kind of person. I would prefer you maybe not watch a film on your iPhone, but I don't really care as long as you watch it and can see it and understand it. The one big exception is that there's at least one film that we're going to be watching that's on Netflix, and you may need to track one or two things down on Amazon or iTunes or however else you need to find them. I'm not a cop, so whatever you want to do, just make sure you can watch the movies. Before I move on, I'm going to stop sharing briefly. Does anybody have any questions about anything? Feel free to type it into the chat or to unmute and ask me directly. Either way, it's up to you. I just want to make sure. Just going to give it a few seconds.
Do you have a preference of if we do the theory readings and then the movie screening? Do you think it would help, or if we watched the film before we tried to attempt the reading?
I don't know. So sometimes what works best for me is that I read the thing and try to actually just understand what they're saying. And then I look at the film that we're watching and then try to see how that applies. Other times, if I'm having a really tough time reading through something, I'll watch a movie and then come back to it and read after. So just do whatever feels right for you. I don't really care as long as you feel like you're getting something out of it and can kind of understand it, okay? That said, I will, like, I'm not giving full lecture videos every week, but I will give little concept videos where I kind of break down key things that you need to get out of the reading and what those ideas are, especially for the more complex ones. So you can also watch those and kind of get a sense of what you need to be picking out of the reading as well, okay? But they'll all be fairly short videos, nothing like an hour of me babbling on about the essay you just read or anything like that. Any other questions? Okay, I'm gonna go back to the screen share. Okay. So I posted on iCollege that there's not a required textbook. And what I meant by that is there's not one that I require you to purchase, although, you know, it might be easier to purchase it. There's one book that we will read in full at the end of the semester. It's James Baldwin's The Devil Finds Work, which is kind of a long form piece of criticism. You can purchase it locally. You can do it through any of those sites I have linked on the syllabus. You can also get a couple different versions through the library or through the Internet Archive, okay? All of that is to say, like, it is available publicly for you to get for free without paying for it. The Internet Archive is completely free to sign up. The caveat is that that one, you can only check out the digital copy for 1 hour at a time, and then you have to return it. And if nobody else has it in queue, you can check it back out. But it is available for completely free. You can also order it to be picked up at the library, either the copy that they have there, which is in a book called Collected Essays by James Baldwin. Or you can order it to be delivered and pick it up at the library from any of the other USG system libraries, or through interlibrary loan in either the Devil Finds Work version where it's standalone or in the Collected Essays. I'll show you guys. This is the book right here. It's not super long. It's like 120 pages or so. And we are breaking that reading into 2 weeks worth of reading, okay? So that is our required book. Like I said, I've tried to figure out ways that you don't have to purchase it, but if you do purchase it, you can find used copies for really cheap, or new copies for like $12. Everything else that we're reading, I will upload directly to iCollege, and you can just download it from there, okay? Hold on 1 second. Somebody just sent me something in the chat, so you can see that. Yeah, I don't care which version you have or where you got it from. Know that the page numbers will be different, but you can ask me about that once we get there. The basic divide is that there's a portion in chapter 2, which is like the longest of the 3 chapters, where he starts talking about Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and we're going to stop the first week there and then pick up the second week there, okay? All right. All right, so here's what we're gonna do. There are not a lot of grades in this class. We have 2 exams. They're not really a midterm and a final. They're non-cumulative. So whatever is on exam 1 is just testing the stuff before that, and exam 2 is just testing the stuff in between those 2 exams. And the second exam, as you'll see on the schedule, is due before exam week, okay? My goal for this class is to get y'all done with as much work as possible before fall break, so that when you come back from fall break, you can continue working on your final paper and stuff for this class and meet with me and talk about it one-on-one, either in Zoom or, however we need to work it out. But that's all you have to do. And then it's also due whenever you want to turn it in, okay? There is a due date because I do have to grade like an ungodly amount of theory papers this semester. For some reason, I'm teaching like 3 different theory classes. So they all add up. So there is a final date, but we'll get it all done before you have to worry about all of your other exams and final papers and whatever else, okay? So the big part of this grade is really that final paper. And it's in 2 parts. There's a paper proposal and annotated bibliography. We'll talk about that in just a second. And then the final paper itself. That alone makes up almost half of your grade, okay? That said, I give feedback. I allow you to rewrite all of that. And generally, you'll be okay. I don't give out A's in this class, but if you do the work and you show improvement and stuff like that, it's not difficult, okay? And that's mostly because the difficult part is getting the reading done and having to spend so much time thinking about it. All right, so I covered this at the beginning, but I've had a few people come in a little later. Attendance is highly recommended. I don't require it. I will post recordings of Zoom sessions on iCollege, so everybody has access to them. And that's also, for those who came in late, why I don't require you to have screens on or be unmuted, okay? And then at each point, I will say as well that we discuss potentially sensitive topics, which do come up in this class sometimes, either because of the theory we're talking about or the films we're talking about. I will also provide periods during those sessions where I pause the recording so that we can be a little more open and a little more in depth if we need to be. And as those opportunities arise, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. That way, I don't feel like anybody's, and this is a really big thing for me, everybody's privacy has been violated in some way or is in threat because it's uploaded onto the USG's server system, basically. And that's University System of Georgia, which like GSU's system all goes through. Anyway, all right. This is your kind of weekly grade, just to kind of make sure that you're keeping up with the readings. You'll turn in a response journal on Fridays at 9, okay? This is a 300-word critical response to the films we're watching and discussing in class. You'll explore a way in which the film's aesthetics and or form are related to a key concept from the assigned reading pertaining to the film. These are intended only to help you learn and practice writing about film from a theoretical perspective. And the more closely your journals resemble, a more or less formal academic form, the more effective and helpful these assignments will be, okay? Now, a word about writing real quick. You have learned, both in college and mostly in grade school, a way of writing that is not necessarily how you need to think about structuring what you're doing for classes like this. The 5-paragraph essay, everybody knows what I'm talking about, right? Where big intro here, then evidence, some conclusions, wrap it up kind of stuff, right? You're going to encounter reading these essays that people are not writing like that. And I want you to feel like you have a little bit of freedom, okay? Write in language that feels comfortable to you. Yes, there is an academic style, and we do want to use grammatically correct English, and even if it's a vernacular English. But do express yourself in these essays, because this is largely about your own opinion of the film, your own analysis of the film, okay? We'll talk more about that as we get into the writing, but just work on that in your response journals every week. And I promise you, you'll improve and get better about it. Okay, proposal and annotated bibliography. So this is approximately 1,500 words. You're going to choose a topic that you want to write about and then submit it for approval in the week indicated in the calendar. Basically, if you're following these guidelines, I will give you feedback on that and give you a grade. You can revise and resubmit the proposal for an increased grade. So take that into account. But the idea here is that you want to get a rough draft of at least your main idea and possibly an outline down on paper, so that when it comes to actually writing, you have a lot to work with and less work to do on the back end, because you will need to spend time editing and rewriting the paper as we go on. Your final paper is 2,500 words or up to 2,800. These are loose guidelines. If it's a little less or a little more, it's not going to, really worry me that much, but just aim for that range, okay? That word count does not include bibliography or endnotes. We'll talk more about all this stuff as it comes up and becomes pertinent. Like I said, you'll be given 2 exams. There'll be short answer questions. They may ask you to define a particular term or briefly compare. The way that I will do this is I will make the questions public the week before on Sunday, and then by that next midnight on Saturday, you just need to type up your answers and turn it into the inbox on iCollege, okay? That's it, really simple. Grade scale, I've got a bunch of information here, like tips to succeed, late assignments. I do take them late, only because there are so few of them that are time-oriented in the same way. Like the paper, like I said, we can be a little looser with that, but the weekly ones, if it's not in on Friday, It's 10% off, so 90 instead of 100. And then an additional 5% up to 3 days after. So if you get it in like by Monday, you'll still get a grade that is not an F, basically. Please don't plagiarize. I have a bunch of new policies I have to update into here because they just gave us a whole bunch of them. So that will populate, but otherwise that's all the key info for the class. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Okay. Any questions about anything so far? Okay. So let's look at the schedule real quick. So this week we had one kind of intro reading. We'll talk about that here very briefly in a moment. Next week is, I'm not going to lie to you, going to be a little rough. If you've already looked ahead and started reading any of that stuff, it's very confusingly structured because what they're doing is writing in a very argumentative style. That's what dialectic means, is they're like having a discussion, an argument. And it's also like very much into making an extreme version of their point. And yeah, it's just going to be rough to read those things, okay? We'll be watching Battleship Potemkin, which you can watch on YouTube or through the library. Then we'll cover the Frankfurt School. This is like 1920s to early 1930s European Marxism as a mode of analysis. And we'll talk about all of that week. We'll be watching 42nd Street, which is one of the ones you'll either have to rent or, you know, if you have access to HBO Max, I believe it's streaming there. You can also just sign up for HBO Max and then cancel it immediately and not pay for the subscription. Then we're going to cover realism, and then watch The Old Guard, which is a very new film on Netflix. That week we're going to focus on how we think about what realism is in relation to film, and Krakauer and Bazan's essays kind of butt up against one another and argue with one another a little bit because they have very different definitions of what reality is in film. Stephen Prince's True Lies, that one's going to be about reality and realism theory, but related to kind of digital effects and modern movie making, hence the new movie we'll be watching. Then we're going to talk about authorship, which is, aside from psychoanalysis, probably the most well-known mode of analysis. This is where you're looking at film through the lens of who created it. So trying to understand it through watching Alfred Hitchcock movies and thinking about who Alfred Hitchcock was and what his hang-ups were or what his obsessions were. And we'll talk all about that. Then we're going to get into psychoanalysis and semiotics. This one is the week that is scary even for me, just to be completely honest, only because it's so high theory. It's not like talking about like authorship is something very easy to wrap your head around, even if they're writing about it in a very complicated way. But psychoanalysis and semiotics is all about signs and reading the image and understanding mental processes and things like that through the cinema. After that, we'll get into feminist film theory. We'll read a very seminal essay by Laura Mulvey, Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema. If you've taken gender studies courses, that gets read in a lot of those as well. And then we'll talk about this Modleski piece in conjunction with the film that we also watched the week before, Rear Window. Okay. Week 8 is our first scheduled in-person session. Should those not happen, I'll figure something out, but I'm not going to assign you like more reading or anything. I think that's stupid and counterproductive. We might figure out a way to start thinking about our papers at that point, and we'll work it out, but we'll know more as the semester goes on. Then we're going to talk about sound. We're going to watch Singing in the Rain. Sound theory is really interesting because we don't really talk about sound a whole lot in film studies, even though it's kind of been a big subfield in film studies for a long time, at least 20 or so years at this point. And this Kaja Silverman essay, Body Talk, will talk about the use of female voices in Singing in the Rain. Then week 10, we're going to discuss issues of race and representation. We're going to read Manthea Diawara's Black Spectatorship, Problems of Identification and Resistance, and this other essay, Vestiges of Motherhood, the Maternal Function in Recent Black Cinema, and we're going to watch Moonlight along with those readings. That is also the week that exam 2 is due. Week 11 is our second in-person session. Like I said, we'll figure out what we need to do as we go along, and we'll make sure everybody's taken care of, okay? Then we get into kind of the last 2 real weeks of the course, 12 and 13, where we're really going to talk about James Baldwin's essay in relation to 2 movies and think about long-form theory and criticism as a mode of analysis. So what you'll see in Baldwin's book is that he's bringing in things like critical race theory, he's bringing in psychoanalytic theory, he's bringing in theories of authorship, of reception, of spectatorship, and queer theory, and kind of all combining that into one work that thinks about his position as a Black man, as a queer man who has been watching movies and loves movies, and what that does to him and means to him, and how that allows him to understand the world around him in a very specific way because of who James Baldwin is as a person. So that week, the first week, we're going to watch In the Heat of the Night, and then the second week, we're going to watch The Exorcist. Yes, it is scary. It is mostly these days pretty silly, I think. If you've never seen it, lots of people do not take it as scarily as when it first came out, or if you saw it as a child. It was still pretty scary, but that's what we're going to be doing. After that, we've got no class for fall break, and then we're going to wrap up the course and do loose ends. So that means we're going to schedule meetings to talk about final papers. We're going to do whatever we need to do to get you to the finish line. Final papers are just due Sunday, 12/13 by midnight. That'll give me enough time over the next couple of days to grade them all and get them into the college with their grades. Okay, so how do y'all feel about all of that? I know it's a lot. It's a lot of reading. It's a lot of watching. But I think you'll be okay, especially, like I said, if you show up to these sessions having done some of the work. I'll accept some of it, if not all, because I know that's a lot. But just know, like, this is where, in film studies at least, like, this is the hard class, okay? You know, like, every major has a hard class. Film theory is the hard class. This is where the rubber meets the road in the discipline. So you'll be fine. We'll make it through it together. And like I said, if anything is going on throughout the semester that you think I should just be aware of, you don't have to be specific or whatever. There's just so much going on right now. And I know that y'all are overwhelmed and I'm overwhelmed, which is why, like, communication was kind of a crapshoot for the first couple of weeks beforehand, because the college wanted us to communicate this thing and y'all to know this thing. And then they kept giving us different information that we needed to let you know. And I'm just over all of that right now. That's not even like the important stuff going on and happening, right? There's still a pandemic. There's like cops shooting Black people in Wisconsin and not getting punished for it. There's just all kinds of stuff that is building up. And I want you to know, like, it's okay to feel those things and to take time for yourself, especially since when you started college, you did not anticipate, hey, I was going to be online so much and having to do, like, this whole new thing that I haven't really done before, okay? So before we move on to talking about the reading, Any questions, general operational questions, anything like that? Yeah, Maya, go ahead.
So you said the final paper is due on Sunday the 13th by midnight. Does that mean by midnight as in
On
like
Sunday.
11:59?
Yes.
Or, okay.
I mean, look, here's what I will say. I am not going to be up at midnight to read that paper. Does that make sense?
Okay.
If it comes in at 3 a.m. because you're up at 3 a.m. finishing it, or it comes in at 6 a.m. or whatever, I'm not going to penalize you. But aim for midnight so that when I get up the next day, I don't have to like send a bunch of emails saying like, hey, where in the hell's your paper? I've got 30 of these. I need to get them graded, you know, that sort of thing. But yeah, midnight.
Okay.
Everybody okay with that? Yeah, like I'm really not going to be up at midnight reading film theory papers. I like y'all. I love all my students. Not that much. I got other stuff to do like sleep. Okay, any other questions? All right, so let's talk a little bit about this Munsterberg essay. This is a very, very early piece of film criticism. It was originally written in 1915 and appeared in Cosmopolitan. And Hugo Munsterberg was, he was a philosopher and psychologist and a public intellectual. So he was a very smart person that would write about things and people knew who he was and would take his opinion seriously, right? So in that regard, he was similar in some ways to people like Neil deGrasse Tyson, right? Who is kind of a public intellectual. He's very knowledgeable. People trust him on certain things, although he says very silly things sometimes. And you're like, what in the hell are you talking about? Munsterberg was like that, okay? And what he is doing in this essay is talking about movies at a time when people like Hugo Munsterberg, who is a college professor, who is a philosopher and is a psychologist and very high-minded and part of society, right? Those people did not go to the movies. Why did they not go to the movies? You can type it or yell it out or whatever you want to do. Take a wild guess. He says it in here.
He said basically because the people at that time, they felt like going to the movies was less than actually going to the theater and sitting in the theater and having that actual experience of the theater. So they felt like it was like a cheap cop-out for, and it was for people who were pretty much less than them.
Yeah, it's low culture versus high culture, right? It's like, oh, you should listen to Mozart, not Cardi B, or you should watch, you know, The Sopranos, but not Survivor, that sort of thing, right? That's what he's talking about. But he goes and he kind of frames it very funnily. He's like, oh, I went on this long trip with my friends and just on a lark, we decided to go to check out the movies and see what the hubbub was about, kind of thing, right? And he goes and he becomes like super enamored with it, right? He sees this film called Neptune's Daughter and is just really into the idea of like what movies can do, okay? So he starts thinking about this. He's like, their purpose is not to imitate nature, right? It's not to appear natural. So even here, even though he's not articulating it in the same way that theorists are going to in a couple of weeks, when we get to realism, he's already thinking about like, what does it mean to call these movies realistic, right? It's not staged stage plays that are put on film. It's a new thing. And he has a couple of different things that he really highlights that make film unique. The first of these is the close-up. Does anybody have thoughts on why he thinks the close-up is unique? Let's try to give other people a chance if y'all want to. And like I said, use the chat if you want. But yeah, Kayla?
Well, at the theater, you're never like close enough to see someone's emotions like that. So you can really like see the actor's face and their emotions and get a sense of expression from the scene.
Yeah.
Another
Anything
thing,
else?
can y'all hear me? Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, another thing was it was talking about directing focus. You can direct focus with the close up to make sure that whatever the person behind the camera wants the audience to see, that's what they see, instead of look at the whole theater.
Yeah, right. I mean, part of what makes, I think, when we look back, if you've ever watched a lot of silent films, which I know that most people in the department do not ask you to do when you take their classes, but like I make my film history students watch it's like 4 weeks of silent movies. If you've watched them, you notice like everybody seems to be doing bad acting, right? Or what we would now term as bad acting. But a lot of that, especially early on, was that what you had was theatrical performers coming in to be in movies. And because they were used to performing where like people 25, 30 rows back had to be able to see what they were doing, they would exaggerate their motions, right? So they'd wave their hands wildly, or they'd grasp their heart when they got shot and then fall over dead, that sort of thing. Now, some of this was done stylistically, right? Like people making films in Germany in the 1920s, if they're making in the expressionistic mode, like that's overacting for a purpose, right? They're expressing psychology outward. But what he's talking about here is in 1915, he goes and he's like, okay, these are not just like the silly things we thought they were, where people are acting and it looks bad. But now they're allowing us to, through the form of the medium itself, so through film, to focus in on very specific emotions and very specific moments to kind of guide us in a way that theater is not capable of doing, right? So the close-up becomes very important. And one thing that I think is really interesting, let's see here, there we go, is that the way he phrases this is at the very end of that section, the close-up, he says, our own attention is projected into the life around us. What does that mean? If you're thinking about, okay, I'm in a dark theater, and then all of a sudden there's this 50-foot face in front of me, right? He's saying that our attention is projected into the life around us. What is he talking about here? Anybody? I can tell you, it's not a big deal. What he's talking about is that the way our brain functions, right, when we're interacting with people, okay? So I know a couple of times, okay, just to use an illustrative example, I know that a couple times during our meeting this morning, I've done this, right? And you've seen me do it. And you've probably really noticed the multiple times that I've done this, right? Okay? Our brain immediately zooms in and focuses on little things during our interactions with people, right? It does that because we're curious, we're also defensive, right? There are lots of different things. What he's talking about is how our attention, our focus, is kind of literally projected into the world at that point, right? He's talking about, and this is really weird because nobody's talking about movies like this at this point. He's talking about how watching movies and the way that the language of cinema works actually corresponds to the way our brains function, right? This is early version of cognitive theory. If anybody's ever read any apparatus theory where they talk about when you're sitting in the room and like the projector behind you is projecting the thing and that becomes your brain's interpretation of the world and all of that. That's what Munsterberg is really saying here, like 45, 50 years before anybody is thinking about that in that field. So I think that's really cool. Okay. He also talks about the way that films are presented as unique to their form. What's the big thing here that he's driving at? Anybody? So if we think about what is unique about film relative to stage plays and how they're constructed, what is that?
We're talking about like the space is endless at this point. You can make space. I mean, you're confined to a theater when you're in theater, but with this new, way of media, you can have it as big as you want.
Yes, so you can leave space behind and enter into different spaces just by virtue of the camera taking us there. What else? There's one other big component. So we've covered space. What's usually the corresponding thing?
Was it what was it?
It's time, right?
Yeah,
It is
that's
time. And how does film manipulate time? Through which process? It's editing,
Cuts, yeah.
right? Yeah. So through cinematography, through editing, film is capable of manipulating time and space and taking us into places that theater is not capable of, and taking us back in time and forward in time. And by combining them in, say, a montage sequence where we're seeing somebody's childhood as they remember something, what mental process is it also emulating there that Munsterberg draws a connection to?
was it memories?
Yeah, the function of memory, right? So literally how we're remembering things. Okay, so do y'all get kind of what Munsterberg's getting at here about like why Munsterberg is enamored with this new art form, and why somebody who is intellectual and high-minded might be drawn to this in this way? Is what I'm asking is it clear what he's saying when you were reading this? It's okay if it's not, okay? I've read this essay a lot, and even this time reading through it, and I do read everything as we're going through again, so I do the same amount of reading that y'all do. I always find new stuff, but it's because he's writing in like a very plain way, right? He's writing in a popular magazine, Cosmopolitan, which back then was kind of more like Harper's, where it was kind of like current events, politics, culture, that sort of thing, and not as much geared towards just women. My point is, and I'll finish it, is that Munsterberg is trying to make a case for why we should study movies at a time when nobody cares about studying movies, okay? And the way he's writing about it is very complicated, but you can break it down into pieces, and this is why I assigned this the first week. You can break it down into pieces and really actually understand what he's saying, which is all to say, especially next week and the week after that, just spend some time with the writing. It will seem incredibly intense and dense, and some of it impenetrable, and that's okay. But think about it how we're looking at Munsterberg's essay. Okay, he's got it broken down into bits and pieces. What's the main function of each piece? What's the thesis of each section? How does he provide evidence for that? And if you're going through and doing all of the reading like you would read this Munsterberg essay, you will be okay, all right? And that's really what I'm trying to get at here, is like multiple people in this class just proved to me that you can understand this piece of writing, right? Yes, there are pieces that are more complex and weird than this that we'll be reading in this class, mostly because people use very flowery academic prose, which I don't like. And you'll know what I'm talking about when you get there. You've all probably already read essays in other classes that are like that. But as long as you're capable of just spending some time with it, you'll get what it's saying, okay? It's also just cool to see, as early as 1915, somebody who's engaged with things like cognitive theory, reception, form, right? Thinking about what the process of editing does. And you'll see all of these crop up again and again and again as things that people are obsessed with in film theory, okay? Any questions before I stop the recording? Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording. Don't leave just yet.